Hello, world. We are going to be examining how marketing leaders are retaining talent. Looking at all the amazing talent today, the truth is it's scarce. There's a massive demand in marketing functions that have increased over the last few years, yet the pool of talent that is required for these functions hasn't exactly increased at the same rate. There is more demand than supply in talent, and for many marketing leaders out there, we're going to be examining how we can best retain our top talent, how we can address quiet quitting, and how we can keep employees happy. Joining me today to tackle these questions and more is Kelly Pronek, Vice President of Revenue Generation and Enablement at PriceFX, and Daniel Kushner, CEO of Oktopost. Kelly, Daniel, welcome to the show. Are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
Absolutely.
Never been more ready, Jen.
There we go. So listen, I'm going to throw out, Kelly, I'm going to focus this one to you to kick us off. But when it comes to retaining talent, what is keeping you up at night professionally?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing right now in terms of retaining talent is, first of all, it's getting the right talent, right? In place that you need at the time, but also knowing that those are folks that can adapt as your needs change. We're a fairly young company, so things change fast. And so what keeps me up is when I do get those folks that can not only come in and do the job today, but can continue to do the job as we grow and develop, that they're staying engaged and interested in the work, right? And that they're, challenging themselves, we're challenging them, and that they're going to stay and do what needs to be done tomorrow, as well as they did the work that needed to be done today.
A lot to unpack, and we're going to unpack it. Daniel, same question. And would you agree with Kelly on that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I would like to add, one more thing about when you ask about retaining talent, right? I like to look at things in the maybe different angles. Like, what does it mean retaining talent? It means to stop people from leaving, right? If you put it in like very dumbed down words. I think what stops people leaving, if they understand that they can be successful at their job, right? Or they believe that they can be successful. As soon as that belief is gone, they're going to start looking, because everybody, or most people, want to believe that they want to be successful. Now, if we drill down, what does it mean to be successful? Normally in businesses that we run, it's around KPIs. We put some numeric number. What is success in sales? It's a quota. In marketing, some kind of KPI. If it's lead, marketing, revenue, etc. So the constant thing, going back to what keeps me up at night, how do you set those targets that can be successful? The employees can be successful towards their targets, but you're maximizing that success, right? It shouldn't be a walk in the park, right? I can set a sales quota to a rep, bring in $20 a quarter, and they'll hit it every single quarter, but that's not a good KPI. I consider at $20 million per quarter, but maybe that's unachievable, and they won't be successful in doing that job. So it's that constant balance and push between how do I maximize the outcome of my department, of my company, versus setting those KPIs for talent that can actually be reached.
So
with lots of hard work.
Of course. I mean, I think lots of hard work, right? Especially because you're always hoping you have a team full of hard workers. And you mentioned that balance of that push and the pull and retaining effectively. How do you hold yourself accountable? How do you know when you're pushing too much or you're not pushing enough?
It's funny because I feel like I'm on both sides of this, right? I have friends who are in sales leadership roles that have gotten frustrated over their careers. They're working their way up on the fact things like, gosh, my quota and KPIs are constantly changing. Well, I sit on the other side of the desk where I'm constantly changing those quota and KPIs, right? Because the things that are going on in the business change, the tools that are available to do the job change. The thing that was hard to do yesterday is easier today, and vice versa, right? So you're constantly dancing this line of trying to motivate good people to continue to achieve and but not overachieve so much that it's no longer beneficial for the business, or that it gets boring for them. But I spend a lot of time, and actually I just had an offsite with my direct reports last week. We spent a lot of time talking about something that I think is really interesting and ties to this, which is the idea of internal versus external control. So as a person, how much internal versus external control do you feel that you have in an organization and in your role? And then also the idea that engagement doesn't typically produce great work. Great work produces engagement. So people end up feeling more engaged, and this goes to the internal control. If I go out and I seek out to do a really good job at something I'm working on, I am likely to feel more engaged in my workplace than if I am just going to do the work and call it a day, right? So you actually start off with great work produces engagement versus engagement produces great work. Maybe that's a hot take. I don't know.
Daniel, thoughts on that?
So when are you gonna have to repeat the question, because my memory is like maybe 20-second span.
All right, so I'll reframe it a little bit and we can dive in, right? We're really talking about some of the ways we can retain our top talent effectively, and taking a closer look into that, right? Kelly mentioned that she had an offsite with her direct reports, and they were talking about engagement, and they were talking about the different ways that you will feel, let's say, and Kelly, keep me honest, engaged at work. So let's open up the conversation, because I'm really curious to understand, and I'm sure many listening in are also curious to understand, because we all seem to have this pain, but how do you keep your A players engaged?
Yeah, I think what Kelly did with the offsite, one of the biggest outcomes is alignment. Right? And alignment sometimes we take for, we don't always look at this as like something which is top priority, because we're in the day-to-day, we're in the grind, we're in the trenches doing the work. We have the monthly meetings and weekly meetings with the reports and the teams and cross-team functionality. And once in a while, and this is where the offsites come in, is to make sure there is that parallel alignment between what the company needs, what the management needs, and what the team players need. And once everybody is looking in the same direction, there's much less friction, and and again, it's getting towards those targets that we need to achieve. And what I found is, with it, not only A players, but any employee, it's much better to address that alignment as soon as they see that it's a little bit off, right? If you think about a small angle, it's going to be a wider gap after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. It's just going to widen and widen the very small offset that we saw at the beginning. So that constant alignment.
We used the same visual last week when we were talking about this idea. There's, you have this baseline, and everybody's at the baseline, but slowly over time, you might start to move down this way. Well, the further out you go, the harder it is to get you back up to the baseline.
Yeah, so it's this constant realignment. We used to use a lot in the early days at Oktopost. This, what do we say, Jen? I forget the term.
I thought you were going to go with crystallizing.
No, crystallizing. Well, we always crystallize. That's a part of the alignment aspect, right? Because you get that compounding effect that if you're unaligned, it can end in a catastrophe.
Yeah. So thinking through that, and dare I even bring it up, because I feel, especially when I'm on the line with marketing leaders, it's a topic that tends to really boil the blood of many. But if you've been following LinkedIn feeds more recently, you've probably noticed a debate that's taking place over a trend that has become known as quiet quitting. And for anyone who may be unfamiliar with the term or hearing it for the first time, it's basically referring to the art of having a job without it letting it take over your life. But we're going to dive into it, because I think it's a little bit more than that. And it first popped up on TikTok, right? And I think this also goes to show how TikTok is suddenly finding its way into the professional space where, a few years ago, I think a lot of marketing leaders were like, no, nobody's going to be seeing me shaking my bum on TikTok. And now it's kind of where we're getting a lot of our content from and trends. But it popped up on TikTok, and now it can be really found all over LinkedIn. And it's really been reported that we're now in what is being called a quiet quitting epidemic. And it's basically, like I said earlier, making many managers extremely frustrated, because how do you address quiet quitting, and how do you talk to your teams about this without coming across as somebody who isn't supportive of a work-life balance, so to speak? So I'm really curious, Daniel, Kelly, whoever wants to speak first, what's your take on quiet quitting? How are you addressing it? How do you think about it? How do you see it?
Yeah, so I'd say maybe it's a little different in our world, right? Again, younger companies, not huge teams. It's a little bit easier to figure out who on the team isn't carrying their own weight. And for me, that's really more what it's about. And even the way my team functions is that idea of everyone should be carrying at least their own weight, right? If we really want to achieve and exceed our numbers, right, then you're going to try and take on a little bit more. And of course, we're going to support one another, because everybody's going to have those good days and bad days. But I think when you look into some of the larger organizations where they're seeing this and it has an impact, it's because it is a little bit easier to hide. But I think back to my life before I came to PriceFX, and I sometimes compare those people to being the same person that I would see when I was in an office every day. And that it felt like no matter what time of day I went to get a coffee, they were in the cafeteria hanging out ready for a conversation. So, and then I would avoid going to get a coffee because I knew I didn't have time for the conversation with them because I had stuff to get back to, right? So I think they were always there. And in some cases, maybe it's a win because they're not absorbing the time from other people in this world where people are mostly working from home, and those quiet quitters seem to be working mostly from home. Maybe it's not a bad thing. They were already not super productive, but at least now they're not stealing time from other people. I don't know. That's my opinion on that.
Daniel, you look like you're
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. What Kelly said is like spot on. It's not something new, right? It's always been there, right? It now just maybe has a name or a different name, right? If you look back, you also in marketing with account-based marketing, right? ABM has always been, we've been doing ABM for decades and decades. Right? I remember that we used to, in the old sales, like 30 years ago, used to send a doctor, if you're selling like medical equipment, right? Your dad's from the medical equipment setting, right? So maybe he did this, Jen. Used to you send a golf ball to a doctor and say, listen, if you want to meet with me, I'll give you the golf club. Right. And that's like ABM.
I was in the security world. I was the one sending the golf balls to security officials, and I don't golf. So that was that was fun.
So so it's always being here is now, it has a name, it's popular because it makes a good TikTok video. People like to whine, and they have now a platform that people like to listen to people whining. So it's created some popularity. I think that the biggest issue that I see, like putting this on front stage, you're claiming there's us versus them. It's me, the employee, versus the company, right? These two incompatible components of some kind of entity. And it shouldn't be like that, right? It's all about teamwork and working together, and the 1 + 1 = 3. And as a group, we can accomplish much more as we can individuals. And this constant mindset of it's me against the company is one, it's the pure negativity. I don't think it gets that employee, it doesn't get them anywhere, right? If I understand that I have someone who is quiet quitting, right, considering that can't be fixable, like they're out of the company within the next day or whatever's legally appropriate to do, right? It's not part of it's not good part of the cultural organization. At the end of the day, if we understand, what I understand as the CEO of Oktopost, that I succeed if my employees succeed. Right? I can't succeed running Oktopost, we can't succeed as a company if the individual players, individual employees don't succeed in what they're doing, right? So I'll do whatever I can to make sure that you, Jen, and all the other Oktoposters succeed in what they do. And those quiet quitters, they can, I'll help them find a job somewhere else, maybe one of our competitors.
That's exactly how I feel about it too, right? Because you're working, and it's not an indictment on these individuals, right? Some people end up in jobs at companies that, you know, they thought they were going to like, we thought it was a good fit, and it's just not. But it's hard too, right? So if somebody realizes, hey, I'm in this job, I don't know if I love it, I think I like it, but I'm not really sure, and I need to find another job. Well, depending on where you live in the world and what that looks like, you can't just take a month off and go find another job, right? There's serious implications to things like access to healthcare and income and all this good stuff, right? So you're always, ideally, you don't have a bunch of this going on, but you're probably always going to have a person here or there within the organization that isn't 100% committed, right? But what can we do as leaders to make sure that the people that we do have in the organization are carrying, and I go back to it because it's an easy reference, are you carrying your own weight? Right? If you're carrying your own weight, great. Because if you're a good person and you might not love the job you're in, but you at least have respect for the people you work with, you're going to want to at least carry your own weight for the sake of your peers.
I would have to agree with that. You know, I want to ask something around quiet quitting, because I think, again, just reading through the feeds of the debates that are going on LinkedIn and just doing the research behind what actually this term is quiet quitting and not caring the same thing? Because I think, Kelly, you kind of brought up that it might not necessarily be about not caring, but just being at the wrong place at the wrong time, if you will. But or is it about not caring, right, about your fellow colleagues or the organization in which you represent?
I think it's all in how you enact quiet quitting, right? You might have somebody who's quiet quitting that it really just means that, like, I'm going to go to work every day, I'm going to do my job, and when I log off at night, I don't give it a second thought. And I've got a side hustle that I'm running, and I'm doing something else that's really the thing that's charging me up. You know, my day job isn't the thing that. So you could consider, as a company, I could look at that and go, oh, well, man, that person has, you know, hours of productivity that they can pump out. Why aren't they putting it into this job that they have with us? And they're putting most of the effort over here. So some people, I think, have dubbed that quiet quitting. Then you have the people who just don't care, right? And the world has always been filled with people who just don't care. It's a job. I came in, I did my work. I'm going to do the minimal necessary in order to get paid and, you know, stay off the radar. That's, some people are just like that. A lot harder to be like that in a startup type environment. So hopefully, for anybody who's worked in a startup, you've seen those people might have made their way in. They don't last long. And then you have, I think, the folks that just, you know, their version of quiet quitting is, I am spending some of my time looking for another job, but I care about the people that I work with, and I don't want to have, you know, I don't want on my resume to say, oh, I worked at this company that failed and I was there when it failed, right? You don't want that. So you're going to at least put in the effort to carry your own weight, be a good human. So there's probably 3, maybe more, but at least 3 different ways to approach quiet quitting.
Daniel, any thoughts?
No, I don't think I have anything interesting to add to what Kelly said. But you know, when, you know, on the flip side, well, what's the opposite of quiet quitting? You know, for me, it's going the extra mile, right? And honestly, I don't understand. You know, is this like a post-COVID thing? Is this a generation thing? Like, what became wrong for employees to go the extra mile, right? Is that something bad? So, you know, one, again, I don't get the quiet quitting. It's always been there. People, I would say most of the people who are quiet quitting, they don't care. And in my organization, you know, of course, we don't want those employees, and we'll, if we find them, we'll weed them out as quick as possible. Right? When I look at myself, you know, I've, you know, my targets and my promises to the investors and to the board of Oktopost, right? I do whatever I can to exceed the targets. right? My pride is coming to the board at the end of the quarter or coming to the investors, say, we set target X, look, we got X plus 5, right? Well, what can be, you know, a greater experience and, you know, personally to exceed some kind of target, and you know, why that doesn't trickle down through the entire organization, it beats me, right? That this negative became something so positive. The quiet quitting became a positive trend in a certain sector of the generation.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me, and I'm with you. Like, gosh, I love it when you overexceed and the attention that gets, and I love sometimes the challenging conversations that come from it with the. And I'm sure you've heard this. Anyone who overexceeds a promise to a board will occasionally hear, "Were you sandbagging?" Or when you set that next goal, they're like, "Is that a stretch or is that real?" Like, and that's a fun conversation to have, right? And it's especially when you know you're not, and you're just really, you know, doing a great job. It's interesting though, because you mentioned something, and I almost wonder about this. I've seen this happen, especially with more entry-level folks coming into the team. I've seen it, you know, in my current company. I've seen it in my previous company. So it's definitely post-pandemic, pre-pandemic. One was old, you know, multi-generational, almost 100-year-old business, and here I'm at one that just turned 11, right? So very different cultural environments as well. But you get these folks, they're new, they're fresh, they're out of college, they're excited about their job. And then you get the folks that are also new and out of college and maybe not so excited, but happy they have a job. And then they make fun of or bully that poor person that's like, you know, they call them the brown noser. They make fun of them for booking meeting times with folks like myself or Daniel, just because they want to, like, you know, a 30-minute with the boss type thing and skip levels. Like, these are the people that, you know, come in with this, like, you know, childlike wonder and enthusiasm for the job, and I see them sometimes get beaten down by their peers, and that makes me really sad. That's something I do everything I can to quash. But Daniel, have you seen some of that before, where you almost feel bad for that kid who's the, you know, the overachiever that's getting you know, doesn't get invited to happy hour because everybody thinks they're a brown noser?
So I don't think I've seen it, you know, specifically with the younger generation, but there is. I remember like 15 years ago, maybe. This is prior to Oktopost. You know, a part of us VP marketing at another Israeli startup. We had a small SDR team, and we had a few young individuals that were like booking meetings hand over fist, like meetings. And there was one person in the team that was booking less meetings significantly, and he actually spoke to one of the SDRs and said, "Listen, can you maybe schedule less meetings because you're making me look bad?" Right. So, and that goes back to your very first statement, Kelly, where what's happening now, it's not new, right? It's getting broadcasted. We have the platforms, the TikTok, LinkedIn. It's always been there. Unfortunately, it always will be there. And maybe because of the social media and the platforms that we're able to distribute, you know, this kind of information and feelings and trends, that you have people, they pick it up for the wrong reasons. Right? They'll pick up this, oh, this is so cool, this quiet quitting, I'm going to do quiet quitting. And if they weren't exposed to that TikTok video or the 100 videos that they saw, they could have been a very productive employee and go home with satisfaction that they're doing good at their job.
I think it's right. I mean, it's that idea of going home with satisfaction on how they're doing. I'd have to imagine for some folks that are just trying to fit in, right? If they're surrounded by some of this and they're just trying to fit in, and they're like, hey, people want, you know, you come to work, and yeah, hopefully you get to do something with work that's very meaningful and exciting to you. But maybe your job isn't super meaningful and exciting, but the environment you work in and the people you work with are, which then means if everyone around you is in that camp that quiet quitting's the cool thing, maybe that's what you're going to try to do to fit in. I just think of, like, you know, I wasn't the cool kid in high school, but I would slack off to try and fit in and to seem like I was the cool kid. In retrospect, why did I do that? It was so much more interesting just to study the stuff and get a good grade than, you know, whatever thing I did with, I don't even know who, on the weekend. Like, that was not as interesting. But again, I'm not the cool kid, never have been.
There you go. Well, you know, I think it's valuable insight and it's interesting thoughts. I think we're coming up, you know, on that 30-minute mark, and I want to close on a high note because, you know, just from, you know, Daniel working with you for many years, Kelly having the opportunity to speak with you and learn from you. I'm curious to know, you guys have been people first leaders for quite some time. And I think just engaging with this topic of, you know, retaining talent effectively and even having the, you know, the radical transparency to open up about quiet quitting, which many, I think, leaders are kind of, you know, shy to even give an opinion because, you know, maybe if we don't talk about it, it will go away kind of thing. But I'm curious to know, right, after leading so many teams, mentoring, you know, different team members, if you could give, or if you knew what you know today about retaining talent, what's one thing you would have done differently at the start of becoming a leader?
We're going to fight over who answers first.
No, one lady's first, but I can answer if you want.
I'll let you go first.
Okay, so there are two things. One is what I spoke about before, the alignment. Right, I've got so many things in my head and constantly thinking about things, and sometimes it's obvious to me what I think about, what I know other people know, which is not the case. So sometimes I have to slow my thinking down and get my thoughts across to the other person, so we'll be on the same page. Right, so that's like constant alignment and not assuming that everyone's on the same page. The second thing about the talent is that what I've learned is that money doesn't solve problems. Right, we try to throw money at like talent problems. It works for like maybe a few weeks, couple of months, and that's it. It's not long term. So those are the two things. Don't use money to solve talent problems, and constant alignment and realignment.
Kelly?
I agree with both of those. Yeah, absolutely agree with those. I'd say the other thing that I've learned is the importance of being very transparent with folks. So I know we were talking a bit about radical transparency, but I think that's also really important to create an environment where it's okay for folks who are on the team that don't love what they're doing to be able to say that and have those conversations in a way that doesn't make them feel like their job has been jeopardized, right? Because otherwise it's tension that's sitting in the room. You know it's there, you know they're unhappy, you're unhappy with them, but nobody's talking about it. Like, that's crazy. Let's talk about it. So I think that's one advice that I would give my younger self, is that it is not, you know, it is your mission as a manager to be able to lead a team, and you want to retain talent, right? But to go back to earlier, it's how do you define that? What does retention mean? What does talent mean? And it also has to make sense for the business. So it's not just about keeping bodies in a seat that are keeping a chair warm if it's not the right body in the right seat. So I think that's one of the big ones. Alignment, though, I'll just reinforce that as the second one, that you cannot say enough about how important it is to have alignment and not assume that people know what the heck you mean when you said something, or that they know what your underlying motivation was for doing something. It's having to always go back and, you know, validate that with your team.
Kelly, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me on this segment of Radically Transparent. And I look forward to future segments because I think we have a lot left to talk about when it comes to what we've learned and putting our people first. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast, brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you love today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.oktopost.com. Until next time.